Okay, we are back live with another Between the Pages book chat. And today our guest is fantasy author Nathan Tudor, and he's here to talk about his book, The Empire's Lion, which is book one of the Imperial Adept series. And it's a military fantasy, so it should be a fun chat. So I'm going to let him introduce himself now. So take it away.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I'm Nathan Tudor. I'm an epic fantasy author, and this is my first series, and it's a military fantasy set in a Mediterranean world full of action, intrigue, magic, and let me show you the book here. So The Empire's Line is book one in the trilogy, and it's a pretty sizable one. The paperback is about 630 pages. It's a little over 200,000 words. So if you like intricate, thick books, then I've got it right here for you.
Yeah, well, that's about the right size for a good fantasy books these days.
Exactly.
Okay, so give us an overview of the book. What's it about?
Sure. So the book is set in a time when this expansionist empire called the Lazaran Empire is reaching out across the world, and really the secret to their conquest is their elite unit of magical warriors called the Adepts. And the Adepts are not only gifted with superhuman strength, but also incredible powers like being able to throw fire from their hands, which is the case with Rava, the protagonist of this series. Now, the catch is that for certain mysterious reasons that no one quite knows, a native born Lazaran cannot become an adept. They have to be foreign born. So the Adept Corps recruits from all these other nations. And ordinarily, part of the code is, well, you cannot serve the Empire in the nation of your birth because, of course, they're worried about conflicts of interest or rebellion. But Reva messes up on one of her missions, and she gets close to being, having her career cut off at the knees forever. But she gets one more shot, and basically the Empire tells her, okay, go back, conquer the land of your birth, and you'll get another shot. And so it's a story about not just war, but about dealing with identity, dealing with the struggle to decide what's right, who you owe what to, and yeah,
Sounds
it's
very
quite a
cool.
ride.
Okay, so you've said that it was this Mediterranean sort of style world. What made you choose that particular part of the world to pattern your fantasy setting after, instead of
That's a
saying
great
it
question.
medieval?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in college, I majored in religious studies, and I had a focus in the ancient Near East, the Greco-Roman world of antiquity, the Holy Land. And so as I was thinking about, you know, what kind of world I wanted to set it in, I realized I had all this um, historical, cultural, religious knowledge about this time period, these ancient cultures, and a lot of the things that these cultures thought about and cared about in their mythologies, their works of art. These were things that fascinated me and interested me, and so I sort of naturally began drawing upon them as I was building my setting.
Mm, cool. I'm also writing sort of Mediterranean uh,
Mm,
fantasy novels. It's set in Venice. It's a historical fantasy, so
mm,
curious
yeah.
as to why. So tell us about the main character. What's she like?
So Reva is sort of a strong and stoic personality. She is raised in this desert nation called Talanus, which is inspired by ancient Judea. And she's a young girl. I'll show you the book actually. So this is Adept Initiate, which is the prequel to the series, and I actually give the digital copy away as a reader magnet on my website for free, nathantudor.com. So if you want to learn more about that, that's the best way. But if I could summarize it, basically, Reva is put in a situation of enslavement, and she's sent to the Lazaran Empire. And when she's there, she's caught in this screening that discovers she has, the capacity for magic, and she's drafted into the Adept Corps, basically. And because of her experiences, because of what she's gone through, a large part of her psychology is my worth, my value is dependent on what I can do for the Empire. And so she's incredibly ambitious. She's incredibly driven to succeed. And she often struggles with what those priorities force her to do, the moral choices and dilemmas she's put into. And so she's a complex person. She's someone who I relate to a lot because I think one thing that I put into her was, the conflict between having worldly ambitions and also wanting to prioritize, things of more transcendent value like friends and family. And
Okay, so
so she's put into these positions where she can't solve all her problems with superpowers and magic. And I think that's what makes her compelling.
cool. So we have some love for the cover from SD Houston.
Thank you. Yeah, I love the cover too.
Yeah, it's a very cool cover. So tell us a little bit about the world. You've mentioned the desert kingdom. So what other kingdoms or countries are in your fantasy setting?
Sure. So north of the Lazaran Empire, we have these two sort of related but distinct nations called Gallia and Here Gallia, which are sort of a Germanic and Gallic, or the Gauls setup, where things get more wintry, a bit more frozen taiga forests, and the methods of warfare there are distinct from in other places. So one of the cool things I think about the world is, because I'm telling the story of an empire going out across the land, I get to show how different cultures and different people groups fought, how they defended themselves, different ways they governed themselves. So up north, things are more clan based. There's more of an emphasis on individual strength and freedom. Methods of war are a bit more guerrilla tactics, as opposed to the sort of regimented Roman style legion fighting of the Lazaran Empire. And then in contrast to that, there's the nation of, even calling it a nation is a bit too strong. It's this area known as Parthava, which is more grass plains. It's full of these horse riding nomadic tribes that prize archery and a connection with nature and sort of a more ephemeral spirituality than maybe a firm, religious hierarchy like in some of the other cultures. And there are characters coming from all these different settings coming together into the core plot line. And that's one thing that I've really found readers appreciate. It feels like they're getting such a wide-ranging cast of characters coming together, and sometimes as allies, sometimes in conflict.
Yeah, you could definitely see the parallels to ancient Mediterranean and Eastern European cultures
Absolutely.
when you're talking about it. That's cool. Um, so, what was the hardest scene or type of scene that you wrote in the series?
That's an excellent question. I think the hardest scene to write was, well, I won't spoil it, but there's a scene right around the middle of the book where it really highlights how Reva is being torn in two directions in regards to her sort of adopted loyalty to the Lazaran Empire and her, you know, inherited kinship relationship to the desert nation of Talanus, where the Empire is really starting to crush the Talanisti resistance underfoot and using some gruesome methods to do so. And that was a hard one to write, not just because of the emotional turmoil that Reva as the protagonist is going through, but also just I think in a technical sense, it can be scary to write about really dark and gruesome things because you want to do justice to the reality of these things, but you also don't want to portray them in maybe too ecstatic a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you don't want to glorify them. I'm very familiar with writing dark and gruesome things, as everyone who knows me
Yeah,
understands.
there you go.
What was your favorite scene or type of scene that you wrote for the book?
My favorite scene was probably the moments of connection between characters in between the fighting and the war. So it is a military fantasy book, but to me, one of the most engaging things about war stories, about stories of military characters, is what they're like off the battlefield, how they find companionship with one another, how they help one another through, you know, not just actual struggles for life and death, but also how do you cope with the fact that, this morning you were killing someone, now you're having dinner. And I think that it's those scenes really allow the reader a strong glimpse into what these people are like and how they can care for one another.
Very true. So tell us a little bit about some of the secondary characters. Do they sort of linger in the background, or do they step up and steal the scenes from the main characters?
Yeah, so Reva hires a mercenary early on in the book by the name of Yaros, and he's from the island archipelago of Karela, which is a lot like Greece. And he's a bit of a fan favorite because, as opposed to Reva's more stoic and sometimes almost naive demeanor, he's very humorous. He's always lighthearted, and he balances that with a very uh, vigorous capacity in combat. And so he's you almost never know what he's going to say next. It's is he going to be suggesting serious tactics, or is he going to make someone do a spit take when he throws out some joke?
So yeah, the fun characters always get the reader's attention, don't they?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, so what are your characters afraid of?
I think Reva is afraid of, in a word, becoming useless. And I think that fear comes from the abandonment she experienced in her childhood. Um, you see that happen in Adept Initiate. And so the way she's built up her sense of self is based around being as useful as possible to the Lazaran Empire in this case. And so her greatest fear is that she's going to fail, because failure means she might not be held up and replaced. And I've had readers point out to me, this seems kind of irrational. Like she's got magic, she's an adept, isn't shouldn't she have some more confidence? And that's exactly right. She should have a bit more confidence, but this is such a deep-seated fear of hers that it drives her to great heights, but under those heights of achievement, there's always that uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that in just other and historically people as well. A lot of people who are powerful, they also have insecurities and quirks and things that drive them.
Absolutely.
So now I've lost my train of thought with the question. Oh dear.
Oh, sure. Well, we were talking about what the characters fear, so I could talk
Yeah.
about some other characters, or
Yeah, go ahead while I try to remember what the heck I
sure,
was gonna
sure.
ask you next.
So, if I was to talk about the primary antagonist for most of the book is this Talanisti man named Avi, who has a title as well. He's called the Wolf of Talanis, and he's sort of an assassin, and he is the biggest threat to Reva during the course of the book because he has this magical artifact that is an anti-magic sword, effectively. So Reva's fire can't hurt him. But what's worse than that, if he lands even one cut on her skin, that sword is going to destroy her capacity for magic.
Okay, so
So he's quite an antagonist.
that was
Oh yeah,
actually the question I was
that's
going
where
to
you were
ask is,
going. Okay.
does the book have an antagonist, or is it more circumstantial, emotional conflict? I, you kindly answered it for us. So tell us a little bit about the antagonist.
There
What's
we
he like?
go. Yeah. So he's sort of a passionate young freedom fighter in a sense. He's devoted his life to serving the kingdom of Talanis, and when the Lazaran Empire steamrolls in, and when there's a traitor within the Talanisti kingdom who sort of betrays them to the Empire, Avi and some of his compatriots are forced underground into this more resistance guerrilla fighting situation. And so Avi is very tenacious. He's very driven by anger, I would say, towards not just the empire at large, but when he learns that this adept Areva, who is of Talanisti birth, when he learns that she's the one who's coming to subjugate the nation, he starts seeing red because it's yet another betrayal that he can't even comprehend. So he sees it like his personal mission of, you know, in a sense, a righteous war to kill Reva and save his kingdom.
Cool. So
Hmm.
you obviously write fantasy.
Right.
Are there any other genres that you want to explore in the future or have explored?
So fantasy is definitely my biggest interest as a writer and a reader. Down the road, eventually, I would like to step into maybe not full science fiction, but more of a science fantasy space. So think of settings like Warhammer 40,000, where you have conflict that's raging across the stars with really advanced technology, spaceships, but also a very strong magical and mystical presence. The interaction of those two things is very fascinating to me. So at
Yeah,
some point in the future, I'd like to branch out into that as well.
yeah, it is. It can be very cool. So I think we'll wrap the interview up here and just tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
Great. So, as I said earlier, if you go to nathantudor.com, you can sign up for my mailing list and get a free digital copy of Adept Initiate, where you'll get the story of how Rava's journey began, and it'll be a great introduction to the world and setting of the Empire's Lion. On social media, on Twitter, you can find me at Nath Tudor Books, and then on Instagram, it's Nathan Tudor Author.
Okay, and I have the book linked below as well as the website, so be sure to check out Nathan's books. And I'd like to thank you for being our guest this week. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful talk.
Okay, Between the Books may not be back next week, but we will be back in October, so join us then. And that's all for now. Bye.